Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, some big stories for the night. We've been talking for a while now about the launch of this new social media network by Mike Lindell, also known as the Pillow Guy, right? My Pillow. We're not clear yet whether this is going to be the one Trump's going to use. We do know Trump is announcing something. Mike Lindell has talked about his upcoming new social media before, which is going to be some kind of combination of a Twitter and a YouTube, apparently. It's going to be released on Monday. We have some updates on that today. Also going to be going over a bit of what's happening with James O'Keefe of Project Veritas getting deplatformed by Twitter, while also talking about suing Twitter as he is releasing all these videos exposing CNN, while also filing lawsuits against CNN and some of their different journalists there. We're also going to go into some what else is happening, including more attacks on the Epoch Times, more details on it, and going into a bit of what's happening with Trump, as well as what's happening with the Democrats talking about packing the courts. So some big stories for the night, folks. And everyone, good to see you all here. Yeah. Hey, Vincent B. Yeah, hi, Josh. Blessings. Thank you. Ronald Jarvis, thank you. Molly John from Texas. Good to see you here. Thank you. The drink for the night, by the way, is pu'er tea, which is quite nice. It's like a preserved black tea. It's very nice. All right, folks. Yeah, I'm on the road still. Those of you wondering what's up with the background, but yeah, some good stuff in the works still. I always tell you, folks, some good stuff in the works, but good stuff in the works. All right, let's jump into the first story for the night. Going to be talking now about Mike Lindell. So first, story Epoch Times reports. Mike Lindell, free clean speech social media site set to launch Monday. He says, MyPillow's Mike Lindell announced on April 15th that his new social media platform called Frank, which is quite funny, actually, because like speaking frankly, i.e., with the mission of providing a place for free speech as laid out in the U.S. Constitution, will launch on April 19th, Monday. In a video statement, Lindell said he is taking steps to make sure that the site is most secure with its own servers. In other words, can't be deplatformed like the deplatform Parler, and will not be subject to censorship on the whims of big tech companies such as Amazon and Google. And he said this, quote, "We're going to get our voice of free speech out there," Lindell said. "On Monday morning at 9 a.m., we're going to have the biggest launch. I call it a Frankathon." And he continues on this saying, "I'm going to be on there live all day long. It's like a YouTube, Twitter combination." And he says, "You've never seen anything like it." He said, "You're not going to have to worry about what you're saying and worry about being able to speak out freely." And he added that exceptions to this are speech that threatens violence and using foul language. So no foul language permitted. And he said you don't get to use the 4 swear words, the C word, the N word, the F word, or God's name in vain. Free speech is not pornography. Free speech isn't "I'm going to kill you," he said. So some restrictions on it. Mainly it looks like he's trying to keep this as a clean platform. None of the 4 swear words that he's naming, C word, N word, F word, or God's name in vain. And again, Twitter, YouTube combination, so we can expect news updates and video functions. We'll see how it is, as well as he mentions, the ability as well to have his own servers. And we'll have to see whether he expands these servers to other folks. Now, remember a while back, he was talking about launching his own video platform. Remember, he did these videos about election integrity, let's call it. Right? He did these videos talking about election fraud, and then YouTube deleted them, and he got very unhappy with it. And lo and behold, he's gone and started his own social media. Now, it's not clear whether Trump is going to be involved in this at all, although we do know that Trump was talking about starting up a new social media website within 2 to 3 months of the given date. We're now about a month from that. And so it's not clear whether Mike Lindell is going to have a separate video platform, separate social media, than Trump, or whether Trump is going to say co-invest in this with him. We'll have to see how it plays out, because if this is the one Trump's going to use, we might see Trump make a reappearance here as well. But we'll have to see. And we'll see how it grows as well. You know, a lot of folks have tried launching their own platforms for social media to replace the big names of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. But even though some have made some grounds, they really haven't been able to keep it. If this does work as something that can replace that, though, and actually Mike Lindell does have the credibility, he does have the, say, public allure to be able to draw enough of a crowd to make it happen, it might actually happen. And if this does happen, if Mike Lindell's social media website does take off, really this could be the beginning of something very interesting when it comes to an alternate economy. Because it's not just, again, going to be a website. It's going to be a video platform, meaning journalists, right? How many of you out there have had people you watched on Twitter or YouTube get deplatformed? How many of you watched different shows get deplatformed over the past 4 to 5 years? I can think of a lot of people who got deplatformed. And remember what happened, right? Let's think back. Think back to 2016. Remember what the media was telling us? They were trying to figure out why Trump won. Remember, New York Times, right after Trump won, published an article saying this? They said, maybe we got something wrong. It seemed at first they were going to be introspective about it, right? New York Times was publishing these headlines saying, how did the polls get so wrong? They were saying Trump had 2 to 3% chance of winning, some of them, right? And it looked like they were going to be introspective about it. And then what was the conclusion when they decided how did he win? They decided there was too much free speech because they were arguing right afterwards that YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and every open platform was somehow controlled, right? Somehow controlled by the alt-right. And that was when they started framing the idea of the alt-right. Manufactured label, essentially, that, deemed everybody on the conservative side an enemy of the new people, let's call it. And so what happened? They said in order to stop Trump's populism, in order to stop everything that they were arguing Trump represented, they had to deplatform every single person they could. And they banned, I don't even know how many YouTubers. I mean, all the major voices on YouTube. Remember, folks, in 2016, conservatives were actually some of the biggest voices on YouTube. Conservatives are some of the biggest voices on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere. And the only reason that is still not the case is because all those major voices got deplatformed. And now we see a new platform coming up. And if this can replace what Twitter once served, and what Facebook and YouTube once served, and Google, YouTube, if it can replace what these serve, really this could become the new place for people to come and make businesses again around things like you're watching right now, right? The ability of people to speak freely, the ability of advertisers to advertise on video channels that they choose to advertise on, and really an alternate economy where any business doing business on their news, when it comes to, for example, the advertisement networks or whatever they build for it, they're already going on there with the understanding of the type of communities that are there. And by doing so, they're already making a value statement, which means cancel culture mobs don't have much sway over it. If this plays out very well, this could be a major blow to the ideological hold that cancel culture has over the U.S., right? Because the only way they've been winning the narrative debates is through canceling people. Without being able to cancel people, right? Without that power, they lose their narrative control. Now, folks, I mentioned before, Crossroads, on that note, is totally demonetized. That's why we don't have our super chats anymore. It's why you don't see advertisements before the video, which is kind of convenient in some ways, but it's quite unfortunate for us because we don't get advertisement money anymore from this. But folks, luckily we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to us by American Hartford Gold. And again, tonight's sponsor is American Hartford Gold. And with all the turbulence with the economy, the stock market, risks of inflation, China threatening currency war on the United States, their new digital yuan and other things, and massive multi-trillion-dollar spending by Joe Biden himself when it comes to his tax policies and other policies, right? You can consider investing in an asset that is often stable and that has really been on the incline for quite a while. That is gold and silver. Now, American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. To learn more, please check out the link in the comments below, where American Hartford Gold is providing a free 25-page information guide. And again, even if you're not looking to invest in gold or silver at this time, it's good just for more information if you're looking for it. Now, If you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver on all qualifying first orders. The phone number is 877-260-2764. You can also text Joshua to 65532. Now, folks, I want to go over some questions in a bit, but I want to talk about what's happening with James O'Keefe at Project Veritas first. So in the meantime, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Now, first off, though, let's go over what's happening with James O'Keefe at Project Veritas. Now, Epoch Times reports this. It says, Twitter permanently bans Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe. It says this. It says, the Twitter account of James O'Keefe, the founder of Project Veritas, was permanently suspended on April 15th following a series of recordings the undercover journalism nonprofit posted as part of an expose on CNN, alongside him announcing lawsuits against CNN. A Twitter spokesperson did not immediately respond to requests for comment. However, other reporters said the social media platform told them that James O'Keefe had been banned, quote, for violating the Twitter rules on platform manipulation and spam, which James has been pretty unhappy about. He's been writing about it, and he's now threatening to sue them for making false statements about him. Let's go into this a bit more. Now, Twitter pointed to a section in the company's rules, which states, this is Twitter's rules, it says you can't mislead others on Twitter by operating fake accounts, and you can't artificially amplify or disrupt conversations through the use of multiple accounts. Now, at the time of suspension, James O'Keefe had over 900,000 followers. A link to his profile now shows a screen that states account suspended. Now, James told the Epoch Times in an interview that he'd heard something about a Twitter source repeatedly saying the ban was due to, quote, running a network of accounts that claimed to be things they weren't. In other words, James O'Keefe maybe has insiders at Twitter who've been warning him this was going to happen in exactly the same way that it's now been taking place. Namely, claiming that he was using botnets or fake accounts or whatever to artificially inflate his traffic, which was not true. Now he continues, right? James said, I know what they think, that I'm a Russian bot. Or he said, I don't know what they think, that I'm a Russian bot. And he continued, I don't know what they're talking about. We just did the CNN thing for 3 days, right? They exposed CNN for 3 days with different videos. And he says, I guess we are too effective. Now, in a statement sent via text, O'Keefe said he will sue the social media platform for defamation. He is suing Twitter for defamation. And he said, I'm suing Twitter for defamation because they said I, James O'Keefe, operated fake accounts. This is false. This is defamatory, and they will pay. Section 230 may have protected them before. That's Section 230 of the the Communications CPA, Communications Protective Act, which protected them before, but it will not protect them from me. And the complaint will be filed on Monday. Communications Decency Act. I apologize. Now, what's happening, folks? The timing of this is very interesting. You have James talking about suing Twitter. You have one of the biggest voices on Twitter and on YouTube getting deplatformed, who's really tied into a lot of folks who were very big on YouTube before they also got deplatformed. James has a lot of weight behind him. If James decides to go to Mike Lindell's new platform as this is now launching, that's a big blow to Twitter. That's a big blow to YouTube. And keep in mind, too, that if Trump, of all people, especially decides to go to Mike Lindell's new platform, that becomes very likely one of the biggest social media platforms in the United States overnight. And if that is the place to go to for free speech, for free expression, for videos like this one that James O'Keefe is getting banned for, publishing videos showing insider admissions of what's happening at CNN, including how they plan to manipulate climate change, including their latest ones, talking about how they're manipulating race relations in America, downplaying white, any kind of crimes against white people, while playing up the crimes against any other person and claiming that any attacks on any other person other than white people is due to racism. They talk about why they're doing this. These videos exposing CNN and exposing these journalists who admit in these videos how they manipulate the information in order to push these agendas. By their own admissions, pushing propaganda, right? Some big things happening right now. And we'll have to see again. The big question, in addition to all this, will be one, when it comes to James O'Keefe, will he be able to sue Twitter for defamation? Now, keep in mind, this is not about censorship he's suing them on. Right, Steven Crowder's suing them on similar grounds. They're not suing for normal, like, censorship type things. They're suing them for actual other crimes that they're guilty of, or may be guilty, right? Innocent until proven guilty. And then in James's case, suing them for defamation. And Louder with Crowder, right? In his case, they're suing these different platforms for falsely stating their rules for, I believe, why they censor content or why they can delete content, misrepresenting the types of contracts they have with people. And so we'll have to see whether these go through. But regardless, the other big question is, will these platforms replace the current ones? Will Trump go to them, right? Some big things in the works. We'll keep up with it. Now, on that note, a bit on Epoch Times. Now, folks, you might remember last episode we talked about how the Epoch Times was attacked in Hong Kong, how 4 individuals forced their way into our printing press, the building where our printing press is held. And we have other ones in other countries, but this is our Hong Kong edition. We're blacklisted in mainland China, but we are able to still print in Taiwan and Hong Kong. 4 individuals went in with sledgehammers and a knife, forced their way in, threatened our staff, and then smashed our printing press with sledgehammers. Now, as that is happening now, it turns out the Chinese consulate here in the United States, in LA County specifically, appears to be sending people by their own admission to monitor people who are getting our newspaper from newspaper boxes. Right? Let's go into this. Epoch Times reports. A young woman was collecting data at a local Chinese language Epoch Times newspaper vending box in Los Angeles County, California, on April 12th, claiming that it was being done at the direction of the Chinese consulate, a witness reported. Now, the witness, surnamed Shui, immigrated to the United States over 30 years ago and lives in Arcadia, a Los Angeles city with a large Chinese immigrant population. She's been a reader of the paper for 10 years. Shui went to buy a copy of the Chinese language Epoch Times in the newspaper box outside a post office on Wheeler Street in the morning of April 12th. And in a phone call the same day, she told the Epoch Times that after parking her car, she soon noticed a young university student-like lady who was standing by the vending box and looking around. And she said it's a young ethnic Chinese lady with a book and a pen in her hand, seemingly taking notes. Now, Shui approached and asked what she was doing. The girl froze for a moment and then blurted out, "I'm recording." Shui answered her question directly, but said, Shui recalled, but while asking about the content of the notebook, what she was actually recording, the girl did not answer her question directly, but said instead, "The Chinese consulate asked me to make a record." Now, the girl was not defensive, Shui said, but she seemed to become alert and asked for Shui's identity. Now, while communicating in English, Shui found the girl spoke with a mainland Chinese accent. Now, unclear exactly what's behind that, but we have had incidents in the past where individuals were found to have, for example, sabotaged our newspapers here in the United States. We had cases in New York and other places where people take the entire box of newspapers, tear them in half, and put them back, where people dump things in the newspaper boxes and things like this. There was one incident several years ago where an individual destroyed newspapers like this. The police actually went to his house, another Chinese individual, and he actually showed a gun to them. You know, he had a gun. Unclear exactly what the whole situation was, but the suspicion ongoing is that the Chinese Communist Party is paying people to try to prevent people from finding our newspaper, even here in the United States. Now, when it comes to her recording information about people getting the newspaper, it's unclear exactly what she was doing. She did, by her own admission, say that she was sent by the Chinese consulate. And if you do a bit of research, I've looked into, for example, the United Front Work Department and the Chinese Overseas Affairs Office. Right, the Chinese Overseas Affairs Office works on operations like this. They work alongside the United Front. The United Front being one of the main organizations the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, uses to infiltrate and subvert foreign societies. Alongside them is the Chinese Overseas Affairs Office. Now, what does this organization do? I'd reported previously, actually a few years back now, that by their own admission in their own documents, right, their own documents, they say this, that they maintain databases on overseas Chinese. They keep track of overseas Chinese people. They monitor them, even second and third generation immigrants. In other words, it could be your grandma who immigrated here from China, and they will still keep track of you. Now, these organizations will oftentimes monitor Chinese citizens, Chinese expats, even American citizens, down to, again, second and third generation. Meaning, again, it could be, your grandma came from China, she's monitored by the CCP, your mom is monitored by the CCP, and you are monitored by the CCP. Second and third generation Chinese tracked, monitored, and sometimes even threatened by these groups. We have examples of them now monitoring people in Chinese communities for picking up the Epoch Times newspaper. And keep in mind, picking up the Epoch Times in a Chinese community is making a statement. We do have a Chinese edition. Again, we're blacklisted in mainland China, but we are the main voice of freedom for Chinese people outside of China. When it comes to this, I've interviewed people like this. I had one woman tell me in Flushing, Queens, which is one of the biggest Chinese neighborhoods in New York, tell me that these same individuals told her before they could make her disappear. And she was Taiwanese. She wasn't even from the mainland. They said they could make her disappear. People say they're afraid to speak out in Chinese communities on American soil. The CCP uses these organizations to pressure, to monitor, and to threaten Americans on American soil. And really not much is being done about it. You want to talk about Asian hate crimes. There are Asian Americans, Chinese Americans being threatened by a foreign totalitarian regime for just being here, standing up for democracy, or standing up for religion on American soil. And not just in the U.S. either. You have the same thing happening in Australia really heavily. You have the same thing happening in Canada really heavily, and other parts of the world as well. In fact, there was a story in Canada a few years back where a Muslim Uyghur individual traveled back to visit his family in Xinjiang in China. He was abducted by Chinese secret police, and they told him that he had to go back to Canada and report on them about the Muslim Uyghur community to the CCP. Right? They do these types of things to people. You want to talk about real Asian hate crimes. You want to talk about real harassment of Asian people and minorities on American soil. The Chinese Communist Party is the main source of it. And the irony, too, is you have a lot of organizations, big businesses, still doing business with the CCP despite all of this. Right? These organizations trying to preach to us about history of racism, and these organizations trying to preach to us about history of slavery, engaging with the Chinese Communist Party right now as we speak, sometimes engaging directly in slave labor specifically against religious minorities and ethnic minorities in China. Not just Muslim Uyghurs. They do the same thing to Falun Gong practitioners, re-education through labor camps. They do the same thing to Tibetans. They do the same thing to house Christians. And so this is a big issue. And again, you have all these organizations here trying to, get in their little soapbox and preach to you all about justice and so on when they're doing stuff like this. And so taking for what they're worth. Now, that said, folks, let's go over some questions in a bit. I'll do one more story, then we'll jump into them. I'll talk real quick about these boycotts. Now, remember that after you had I believe it was Georgia, passed the election reform bill. And Biden administration and many big companies started lecturing us about values around, for example, having voter ID. They said having voter ID is offensive, having voter ID is racist, these types of things, that if you have to show an ID to vote, you're suppressing voters. And what got called out? Well, most of these organizations require you to have ID if you want to, say, fly on an airline or go to watch a sports game in New York, right? If you want to go see MLB, right, Major League Baseball, you usually have to show an ID to pick up your tickets. And people are calling them for being hypocrites because they're saying, okay, yeah, you have to show an ID if you want to fly in an airplane, if you want to pick up your tickets to a game, but if you want to show ID to vote for who leads this country, then you're a racist. These organizations are guilty of the same thing they're accusing others of. And Trump called for boycotts against them because of that. And now we have maybe one of the first examples of this. Epoch Times reports a $1.2 billion loss for Delta, but recovery is on the radar, and we'll see if that happens. Remember, Trump called for a boycott against Delta, against Major League Baseball and against several other companies for what they're doing. Epoch Times reports Delta Airlines lost $1.2 billion in the first quarter, more than expected. But executives said Thursday that the airline could be profitable by late summer if the budding recovery in air travel continues. We'll see how that works out if people still boycott them. Now, CEO Ed Bastian said Thursday that ticket sales have been stronger in the last 2 weeks than at any time since the pandemic hit the United States last year. So far, most of the people boarding planes are vacationers booking trips to mountains, beaches, and resorts. The increase in passengers combined with lower costs for labor and fuel helped Delta generate $4 million in cash per day in March after burning cash for the past year. And again, now they've called for these boycotts. Trump has called for these boycotts, and we'll see if that continues. Now, regardless of how this goes, one of the big things Trump is missing as he pushes forward with trying to call for boycotts, calling for protests and things like this is a place to organize. We'll have to see what this Mike Lindell social media does, because if that is the one Trump decides to use, rather than launching his own social media, which is also on the table, we'll have to see which way it goes, he could start using that to call for these types of things. Get ready again, folks, for the grassroots in this country to start taking off, because that's where things are heading right now. All right, first question for the night. Let's go into some questions. This is from Vincent B. He said, Joshua, if Project Veritas wins a lawsuit versus Twitter, how much of an impact would this affect social media censorship? I mean, it's not clear yet. We'll have to see how much money he gets from it, whether he decides to settle or whether he decides to see it all through. One thing that makes James unique at Project Veritas, too, is if he does refuse to settle, you can expect every single, there's a discovery process in defamation lawsuits. And so he's suing them for defamation. If James can sue Twitter for defamation, this is bigger than just the lawsuit itself. This means James can request from Twitter all their internal communications when it comes to censorship like this. It means during the discovery process of this lawsuit, he can request from them all kinds of information, communications, documents, company guidelines, everything. And James just so happens to have internal witnesses speaking without their knowledge sometimes on undercover cameras, admitting to things like this. And James at Project Veritas, look, they get hit a lot by the mainstream media, people calling them out for, getting sued or things like this. As far as I know, they've never actually lost a lawsuit. They file a lot of lawsuits. They've never lost a lawsuit, last I've heard. And they don't get credit for it. If they're filing a lawsuit, they know what they're doing. And I can guarantee you that, again, he's not suing them on censorship. He's not going after them for something that would be under Section 230 protection of the Communications Decency Act. This would not be under that. Defamation would be separate. And so unless the judge says, well, I'm going to extend the powers of Section 230 to say you can defame people and that's okay, which would be really bizarre if they did, because I don't think they'd do it, to be honest. Unless that happens, you're going to have a very interesting discovery process as James goes against Twitter. And he's suing a lot of other organizations right now. He's talking about suing CNN. He's suing New York Times. They're talking about a lot of lawsuits right now. And these could have a very big impact because, again, it's bigger than just the surface lawsuit. The discovery process is what is going to be very, very interesting. And depending on what comes out from that, we could see maybe even as well when it comes to social media, even other countries step in with their own lawsuits. Because Twitter, Google, which runs YouTube, Facebook, and others are also facing pressure from European countries especially. And even from African countries going against, for example, Twitter for deplatforming Trump. And so this could be an international issue. This could go even beyond the United States. This could be them finding information, reporting it, exposing it, suing them at the same time, and then encouraging other people, including foreign governments, to sue them as well. And remember, folks, the timing of this. This takes place as Mike Lindell is launching his social media. And so it's interesting alignment, interesting momentum for something new beginning. And we'll have to see how it goes. Killer Metal 10, he said, hey, Josh, what's up with that Tucker Carlson interview? Yeah, I probably spoke too soon on it. They had me arranged to go on Tucker Carlson. It got canceled because of the riots they had. Was it Minneapolis riots? We are talking about rescheduling now. We'll see what happens with it. We've rescheduled a couple times. It seems to be still on the plate, but I'll keep you all updated on it. I don't want to promise anything until it happens at this point. So we've rescheduled a few times now. It should still happen, but we'll have to see. This is from Sheila Marie. Said, Joshua, do you think Super Chat will ever return? Earliest to contribute, or easiest to contribute and fun. So again, Crossroads, the channel you're watching now, is totally demonetized. Actually, YouTube censored a bunch of the channels of the Epic Times and of our sister media, NTD, which Crossroads also broadcasts on. And again, that's why we don't have Super Chat. You're not able to donate to Crossroads through YouTube. And so, yeah, we don't have Super Chat. We're working on some other things. We'll see what happens. Keep you all updated on it. Some good stuff in the works. But in the meantime, yeah, it does not. We'll see what happens. It'd be wonderful if we could get it restored. I would love to have it restored. I would love to, yeah, Jimmy Ling. It'd be great to see Jimmy Ling come back. I haven't heard from him lately. It'd be wonderful if we were able to have Super Chat and our advertisers back, because it really makes this a viable business here on YouTube, which currently it's a bit rough, to be honest. But we'll see. Now, that said, we do have a donor box and Patreon. If you folks do want to donate to Crossroads, help us keep going, you can find the links to our donor box and Patreon in the description below. But aside from that, I know that Super Chat's kind of, it's fun, right? It kind of keeps things more lively, and it's nice to have, to be honest. It also makes it a lot easier to keep track of questions, because they stick to the top, and so it's easier for me to read them. But what are you going to do? These big tech companies want to have control over what's said and what's not said. So that's where we are with these platforms. Let's see here. This is from Yvonne Pruitt. He said, is it going to be possible to have fair midterm elections? To be honest, I think so. And I'll tell you why. Now, I actually spoke to some folks who were close to Trump during the last days of his administration, who were part of the whole, lawsuit process, looking into what happened with the 2020 elections. And it's not too clear what, this is what they told me. This is what I was told. Take it for what it's worth, anonymous source. But for me, a very trusted source who provided very good information in the past and had really incredible research in the past. This is what I was told by folks who were close to Trump. They didn't realize until the last days of their lawsuits against, alleging election fraud, looking into election fraud. They didn't realize until the 11th hour, until the very, very end, that they filed their lawsuits in the wrong place. Because they went to the Supreme Court. And it should not have gone through the Supreme Court. It should have gone through the local courts. It should have gone through the state courts, which would have encouraged the states to themselves audit, like Arizona is now doing, right? Encourage the states, state by state, to audit, county by county to audit, and have it be done at the state and county level. They made the mistake of trying to push for the Supreme Court, trying to overturn the entire election through the Supreme Court. That's what they tried to do. What happened? The Supreme Court threw out, right when they were set to hear them, they were supposed to hear them. The Supreme Court threw out the Trump lawsuit, it threw out the Sidney Powell lawsuit, it threw out the Lin Wood lawsuit without giving reason on why they did so. At least the Trump and Sidney Powell ones. Didn't even tell people why they threw them out. Something that was so serious, of such high public interest, whether you believe there was fraud or not. Because if you believe there wasn't fraud, why would you not let people actually listen to the evidence and be told through a clear review, through the processes the founding fathers left us in this country, right, to go over the evidence and just say, no, it's not true. Wouldn't that be fantastic? And then people be settled. There'd be no more disputes around this stuff. It'd be done with, and people can go back to living their lives and wait for the next election. They wouldn't be afraid to go out and vote and wonder whether their votes are going to be even counted, right? Wouldn't that make sense? They went through the wrong areas, right? They went through the wrong areas. They went to the Supreme Court, and that was the wrong move. And they only realized it again at the 11th hour. What's happening, I'll talk about Supreme Court packing in a bit, but let me get into this just a bit more. They realized they should have gone through the local levels. And through the local levels right now is where it is currently going through. You have audits taking place in several states, Arizona being the biggest. You have election reform taking place in several states. You have things getting pushed that will ensure that when 2022 rolls around, you're going to have some of the same standards, sometimes even stronger standards that we had back in 2016 before they, expanded their powers over our elections. You're asking Gene O'Donnell, you're asking where's HR 1, which is the election reform bill the Democrats are trying to push through. If they pass HR 1, they're of course going to try to make from the federal level mandated all of the different election reforms they created in 2020. But in order to do that, they need to get rid of the Republican filibuster. And so very unlikely to happen unless they get rid of the filibuster, which would be a really, really controversial move. And it doesn't currently seem like they're going to be doing that. We'll see what happens with it. But they probably can't do it, to be honest. That's just where it's at currently, but we'll see. At the same time, folks, Trump is again going to be pushing these different campaigns. Trump is talking about winning back the House and the Senate for Republicans by 2022. And as part of that, one of his big focuses as well is to, again, go to the local level, right? Go to the local level and back the campaigns of different candidates. And part of that as well is to continue talking about election integrity, to continue pushing states and counties to restore the integrity of their election systems. And you're going to have all the places that matter very likely moving with that if the current trajectory works out, because that's where it's heading. That's one of Trump's biggest focuses, and that's what they're already currently doing, especially if the audits currently being done demonstrate something that's of concern. Arizona being one of the biggest examples of this. And interestingly, Arizona now, as I mentioned before, they had a couple audits. One of the audits in Maricopa County, where a lot of these allegations took place, they did their audit, right, quote unquote, their audit, which essentially they invited people to come and inspect the voting machines and just gave them a thumbs up. Yep, the voting machines look like they're on. Yeah, how about that for an audit? The state Senate, so, essentially that's what they did. The state Senate said this is a bunch of nonsense. We're going to conduct our own independent audit. And they pushed through now, and they're conducting 4 separate audits. One of the individuals doing these audits allegedly said, I did see posts on this online, allegedly said that someone tried to bribe him $10 million to not do that audit. And he's brought up the point that, well, I'm not going to fold, I'm not going to back down, and I'm going to do it whether or not they try to offer me money. And so someone's trying to prevent this from happening. This is what's going on right now. Now, next question here. Let's see. This is from Karen Milke. You said, Joshua, how can we find which companies are using Chinese slave labor? Look for that little Made in China label on them. I mean, to be fair, not all products are made with slave labor in China, but if they manufacture in Xinjiang especially, they're using slave labor typically. But keep in mind, the slave labor issue goes beyond just the Muslim Uyghurs. It's re-education through labor camps, forced labor camps, and there's a whole lot of stuff around this. Epoch Times has reported on this pretty heavily in the past. Remember a while back, there was that big story, Epoch Times had it, where an individual found a note inside of a Halloween decorations box. Someone bought some Halloween decorations, and it had a note in it saying that they were being held captive, held prisoner, and they were talking about how they need help from the outside world. Same things happen with chopsticks. People were talking about it. Same things happen with Christmas decorations, with a lot of the cheap made in China stuff you find sold at some of the big markets. A lot of stuff's made with slave labor in China. In terms of a database showing you where you can find all this, it's very hard to get that. I haven't personally seen a database like that. But I'd say just be wary that when you're buying stuff from China, especially really cheap stuff, there is a significant risk you're buying something made with slave labor. Next question is from Laura Petrol. He said, how are we going to keep elections legitimate in 22 and 24? Should laws be put in place for open viewing and uninhibited audits? Even if states go to more mail-ins, we need viewing of the process. Well, if anything happens like happened in 2020, then definitely, because as you mentioned, right, even the monitoring of the election sites, right, even the poll watchers were denied access in some places, or were kept so far away from the counting of the votes that there's no possible way they could have seen it. The violations, the ridiculous violations of election laws was obscene, happening at obscene levels. And unless something is done about this, unless it's deeply, deeply exposed, well, I think it was already deeply exposed, unless something's done about it, yeah, it is of concern. But I do think things are being done about it, because now you have states and counties becoming aware of what happened. And all the places where it did take place are now under the microscope. All the places it did take place are being watched now. And all those places are, from times these state and county levels, looking to reform things to ensure it doesn't happen again. And so you do have this as a huge focus of the Trump team, the new Trump team working on this. Now, last question, then we'll go into some more stories. This is from Easy For You To Say. He said, question, do you think we're all living in an echo chamber? Many of my liberal friends haven't heard about CNN's being exposed. Kind of. And I think, let me explain this. Yes, we are living in an echo chamber, but that echo chamber only exists because of cancel culture and because of censorship. Where can people find stories like this? Right? Where can people even find stories like this? Right? Can they post it on Facebook? If Facebook restricts the spread of news? Can people find it on Twitter when Twitter banned the account of James O'Keefe, the very person making these claims, the very person posting these videos? No, they can't find it on Twitter. Can they find it on YouTube? When the only way you can find videos on YouTube like the one you're watching now typically is if you already know it exists. Because again, they restrict the spread of the videos through different means, and they restrict advertising through different means. Can they find it on independent media like the Epoch Times? Only if they already read it, because different sites like Google restrict us. Sites like Facebook restrict our ability to advertise. We cannot advertise on Facebook. Sites like YouTube, they restrict us in other ways. And when they do these fake fact checkings, what they do as well is they use the data from that to restrict you even further. And so if the only place they're watching this news is CNN, and the story is CNN being exposed, do you think CNN's going to show it? Probably not. The issue is that they can't even be exposed to this information unless they're already exposing themselves to alternative networks of information. And unfortunately, that's just the reality. How many people do you know who follow those viewpoints, far left, or even just, following the mainstream media? How many people do you know who watch those channels who mix it up and watch some independent voices as well? Right? Not many. Because a lot of them have been told to not even look at independent voices, to not even look and see what else is being said. They're told that everybody other than the handful of mainstream news networks is extreme, and you don't need to listen to them. They're told that everybody else is extreme, and they're pushing ideas that are radical and racist, or whatever narrative they're using at the time being, and to not even look at them. And these labels are used just as political weapons to censor and attack others who disagree with them. And so unless you can show them alternative information, unless you can show them sources, unless you can get them watching, at least diversifying the networks they watch, and I think if they do, they'll start seeing that, hey, there's a lot of stuff these big networks aren't covering. Unless they do that, where are they going to see it at? Right? Where are they even going to see it at? Because the networks they're watching don't show this stuff. Folks, that said, let's move into some questions now. Let's move into some other stories now. Yeah, 111 Robin, he said, if you spell it wrong, they also won't suggest. That's true as well. Unless you know exactly what you're looking for. In other words, if you already know the story, you're not going to find it. And that's just the way it's all, being locked up, let's say. Right? If you know what you're looking for, you can find it. If you know what you're looking for already, you can find it. Pretty much, in other words, if you already know the story, you can find it. Or if you go to networks already that have these alternate stories, you can find them. Otherwise, you're not even going to see it. You're not even going to know it's happening. All right, folks, next story up. Let's go into some more stories for the night. Rubio is saying this: nobody in GOP can defeat Trump in 2024. And it says here, Epoch Times reports, it says if former President Donald Trump decides to run for president in 2024, no Republican can defeat him, said Senator Marco Rubio in an interview on Wednesday. It came after Trump endorsed Rubio, the ranking Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee, for re-election in 2022. Trump is already getting behind elections for 2022 also. Now, Rubio described Trump as the most popular and most influential Republican in America if the former Republican runs for the White House in 2024. Trump has not yet made a decision on whether he will run again, although he's deeply suggesting it in a way that is so obvious it's almost a joke, actually. And Rubio said, quote, if he decides to run for the president and the nomination, he's going to be the party's nominee. Rubio told Newsmax. He said, that's the way I see it. Now, remember what happened after Trump left office. Shortly after Trump left office, it seemed to be the case that there were individuals looking to bring the Republican Party and the Democrat Party back to where they were before Trump even existed in politics. They wanted to reverse things, right? Pretend the Trump administration never happened. Biden began rolling back everything Trump did, getting rid of all of Trump's executive orders, changing all of Trump's policies, and putting things back into place as they were before Trump ever happened, right? Pretending Trump never happened. Now, as they did that, people watched what Trump did, because the things he rolled back, as he rolled them back, we started seeing the benefit of them. Look what's back, right? North Korea making nuclear threats. Look what's back. Iran making threats against Israel and threatening the United States. Look what's back. The Chinese Communist Party talking about forcefully taking Taiwan and saying they're moving forward with a timeline for doing so. Look what's back, right? Terrorism movements coming back. The war in Afghanistan, look at that, maybe coming back. Look what else is back, right? Mass immigration from the U.S.-Mexico border and a border crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before, right? Suddenly it's all coming back. People are seeing what Trump did, in other words. And as well as this, they're also pushing forward with new laws, such as deep gun restrictions, such as even talking about restricting free speech online, having House committees, for example, bringing the heads of companies like Google, Twitter, and Facebook to testify on why they're not censoring as much as politicians want them to censor. You have people talking about vaccine passports and so on. All this stuff is being pushed forward. They believed, I think, that they could get rid of Trump, pretend Trump never happens, and the old guard Republican Party, the Bush-era Republican Party, the one that sided with Biden in the last election, would somehow just move forward as they used to be, right? Remember what happened? You had politicians telling Trump, get behind the Republican Party because they need you and it's bigger than you, need to help out. And what did Trump say? Nope. You get behind me. I'm the Republican Party now. I am the captain. Right? This is basically what Trump told him, right? This is my party now. I'm not in here with you. You're in here with me. And Trump again began pushing forward with his PAC. He created a political action committee. He's doing fundraising and he's backing campaigns. And he's going to be the one deciding who gets reelected and who doesn't, and which candidate's going to be voted for and which ones don't on the Republican ticket. Trump now runs the Republican Party. I don't think they anticipated this happening. And that said, folks, as well, Trump as well, even if he doesn't run for president, he decides who runs for president, essentially, as well, as on the Republican ticket, at least. And even though we can't say directly that we can't say Trump's not going to run, or we can't say Trump is going to run for re-election in 2024, but he's playing with words in such a way where he's jokingly suggesting that he will run, right? He's jokingly suggesting that he will run for re-election, but he's not saying it in plain enough terms that a journalist can say that Trump has said he's going to run for re-election. So he's really suggesting he will, but he's messing with people. Let's put it that way. And seems to be where things are at. Now, next story here. Let's talk about packing the court and where this is at. Interesting story, folks. Now, Joe Biden created a coalition to begin looking into how he can pack the courts. And let's go into what's happening right now as this moves forward. Epoch Times reports, Democrats introduce bill to expand Supreme Court, but the reception is tepid. And it says a group of Democrats on Thursday unveiled their bill to expand the Supreme Court, but party leaders showed little support and Republicans assailed the proposal as radical. The Judiciary Act of 2021 would add 4 seats to the nation's top court, effectively flipping the balance from 6-3 in favor of conservative appointed justices to 7-6 in the opposite direction. They're giving themselves 1 additional seat to make sure they have the majority, in other words. In other words, folks, it's not enough for them to have absolute control at the congressional level, right? Controlling the House and the Senate, even though in the Senate, you do have the filibuster where Republicans can still block some things. Not only is it enough for them to control the House of the President, but they want to control everything. They want to control all 3 branches of government. They're even discussing getting rid of the filibuster and, again, packing the courts, creating their new seats to give themselves these powers. In other words, overriding these separations of powers America normally has. This is putting all powers in the hands of a single party, and they are moving around laws, violating standards, I should say, that have been in place for well over 100 years in order to, again, give themselves absolute power here in the U.S., which I think should concern anybody. And this is in addition to wanting to control what's said online, in addition to trying to control what's being able to be reported, in addition to controlling your freedom of movement, your freedom to protest, the freedom to say what you want to say when it comes to your values on gender or politics or whatever it may be they're trying to oppose. They want absolute control. That is what they're signaling right now. But there are some people who don't want it, even within their own party. And this is where things get interesting. Now, it says here, the rationale fueling the proposal is that Republicans confirmed Justice Amy Coney Barrett after Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died last year. The GOP broke no rules or laws. They did not do anything unusual. But some Democrats were bitter that they did not hold the seat open for whoever won the 2020 election. In other words, folks, the seat opened up, Trump filled it, and they were angry that, again, it gave the majority to the Republicans rather than the Democrats. They're saying that was wrong because they wanted to fill it, right? And they said this is according to Senator Ed Markey, a Democrat from Massachusetts. He said, quote, Republicans stole this court's majority with Justice Amy Coney Barrett confirmation completing their crime spree. What was the crime that was committed, let alone a spree of crimes? He said this legislation will restore the court's balance and public standing and begin to repair the damage done to our judiciary and democracy. And they want to repair the judiciary and repair democracy by eliminating from Americans a democratically elected politician using the democratic processes we've been given in order to fill a seat that was empty. And they want to change the rules, ironically, in the name of democracy, in order to do what they're accusing Trump of doing, basically. Now, continuing on this, Markey introduced the bill with Representatives Jerry Nadler, Hank Johnson, and Mondaire Jones, and continued, quote, I have no plans to bring it to the floor, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told reporters. What does this mean? It means House Democrats are pushing for this. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is saying, I have no plans to bring it to the floor. In other words, folks, Democrats are opposing this bill in itself. Even Democrats are opposing it. And they're saying this, right? Nancy Pelosi said this again, I have no plans to bring it to the floor. And she said, as she voiced support again for Joe Biden's commission to study possible changes to the court, because Biden did make a commission. And so there's a chance that while she's not going to support this bill they're pushing, she may support other ones. And she added, quote, I just heard about it. I'm not ready to sign on yet. I think this commission of Biden is the right move. Not suggesting that Democrats don't want to pack the court, but saying that the bill that was just introduced by Gerald Nadler and others, that they're not going to get behind this one. They're waiting to see what Joe Biden's commission comes up with, and then they'll consider packing the court through other methods, but we'll have to see what that is. Now, Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat, the Senate Majority Whip, added that as well, right? He said it's not the right time. Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat as well, one of the most moderate Senate Democrats, said separately Thursday that he opposes expanding the court. And that's going to be interesting because even if they do get rid of the filibuster, If Senator Joe Manchin refuses to pack the courts, they don't have enough votes to do it. Because again, you have a 50-50 in the Senate, 50-50 split. If even one Democrat deviates from the lockstep moves they're doing, if even one Democrat deviates, they can't push it. And that's it. That's, again, if all the Republicans also don't go for it. And so we'll have to see what happens with it. As this happens, there's another story here. GOP lawmakers renew push to block Supreme Court packing. And it says a group of Republican lawmakers has renewed efforts to prevent Democratic lawmakers from expanding the Supreme Court after a commission was created by President Joe Biden to study possible reforms to the nation's top court. That is the executive branch of the government interfering with the judicial branch of the government, violating a separation of powers that is one of the foundations of how this country is supposed to work. Joe Biden creating a system to look at interfering with another branch of government. Let's go into this a bit more, though. Now, it says here, they're saying that Representative Mike Gallagher, who is leading the effort, proposed a constitutional amendment. This is a Republican, Mike Gallagher, on April 13th, that would limit the number of Supreme Court justices to 9. They have this Keep 9 movement, right? Similar proposals were introduced last year by other Republican lawmakers. And Gallagher said in a statement, quote, "We don't need a commission to know court packing is a radical idea that would undermine confidence in one of our country's most important and trusted institutions." Gallagher said this in a statement. He continued, "The Supreme Court has been comprised of 9 justices for more than 150 years. And it's time we amend the Constitution to make this long-standing precedent permanent before it's too late." Now, Biden's orders on this creates a bipartisan commission that would spearhead debate on Supreme Court reform. The panel would consist of former federal judges and lawyers who have argued in front of the Supreme Court, as well as advocates for the reform of democratic institutions and the administration of justice, the White House stated. And continues stating the expertise represented on the commission includes constitutional law, history, and political science. And we'll see what comes out from that, folks, because they're looking to control all 3 branches of government. At the same time, remember what Trump said. When Trump was questioned about the packing of the courts, what did he say? He said, "Good." Trump said the politically correct Supreme Court will get what they deserve if that happens. He said the politically correct Supreme Court will get what it deserves. Trump doesn't seem to care, because based on what we saw with how they dealt, how they dealt with the election fraud lawsuits that were brought by Trump's team and by others, the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear them. When we're being told this is one of the biggest issues in our country today, whether you're on the Democrat side and you're concerned about radicalism, as they call it, or whatever else the narrative they're trying to push, and you want to make sure you calm down people to ensure them no fraud took place, that would have been important. Or you're talking about Republicans who are concerned about whether their votes even matter anymore, right? Wouldn't it be in public interest to let that be heard? Why did the Supreme Court refuse to even hear it? And that's what happened. And again, folks, the focus now going forward is not for Trump to go through the Supreme Court. When it comes to these things, the focus is on the state courts and on the county courts. That is the focus. That is where things are going to change, and that is where things are at right now. Now, another big story here. We're talking about China. We've been talking about China for a while. Epoch Times reports this. As Biden's emissaries go to Taiwan, and actually it's interesting, Blinken with the Biden administration has been positioning himself decently well when it comes to standing up against the Chinese Communist Party. He is continuing some of what Trump started when it comes to standing up against the CCP and cooperating with Taiwan. They're maintaining diplomatic ties with Taiwan as the CCP is talking about attacking Taiwan. Now, it says here, as Biden's emissaries go to Taiwan, Beijing terms exercises as combat drills. And it says here, China described its military exercises near Taiwan as combat drills on April 14th, upping the ante as senior former U.S. officials arrive in Taipei on a trip to signal President Joe Biden's commitment to Taiwan and its democracy. Taiwan has complained about the proximity of repeated Chinese military aircraft, including fighter jets and bombers, entering its air defense zone, and a Chinese aircraft carrier exercising off the island, which is claimed by Beijing. 25 Chinese Air Force aircraft, including fighters and nuclear-capable bombers, entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, their ADIZ, on April 12th, the largest reported incursion by Taipei to date. And so we'll have to see what happens with this, but the CCP is threatening war against Taiwan. They are threatening a military takeover, not just subversion, but outright military takeover of Taiwan. And the big question is, will the United States do something about it, right? Will the United States step in? Will the United States actually step up to the plate and defend Taiwan if it comes down to it? Not just backing them in their own defense, but getting involved directly. And folks, 111 Robin, he mentioned, hey, Josh, what do you know about the democracy activist sentenced in Hong Kong? I just heard that Joshua Wong, the leader of the Hong Kong protests in Hong Kong, was just sentenced to 17 months in prison. And other democracy activists are also being sentenced as well. And yeah, this is just the Chinese Communist Party expanding its powers. This is the CCP eliminating any possible challenges to its authority. Because what did Hong Kong represent to the CCP? Hong Kong is where they used to launder money. Hong Kong is what they used to do business with the outside world. Hong Kong had special trade status with the United States. The CCP used to use Hong Kong for these things. What did they do? They set up the island of Macau with those same exact trade benefits to use that instead, and then ended Hong Kong's autonomy. Ended democracy in Hong Kong. Ended the rights people had in Hong Kong. And when people spoke out against it, when they called it out, the CCP threw them in jail, imprisoned them. And here we are now. Now, as that happens, it's important to note, why did the CCP do that? I believe it's because the CCP was afraid that this protest would spread to mainland China. Because they were afraid that the protest, the umbrella revolution that started in Hong Kong, was going to wake up the mainland Chinese people. And they were going to be holding similar protests. Protests which actually had been starting up in mainland China. Protests to an extent that do happen in mainland China, but almost never get reported. And what does Taiwan represent? Taiwan represents an example of what China could be. China represents an example of what happens when the Chinese people, right, Taiwanese in this case, but they were originally the government in exile of China, what the Chinese people are capable of if they have a free society, that they don't need the Chinese Communist Party to live happily, harmoniously, to have a successful economy, to have big businesses. Some of the biggest chip makers in the world are in Taiwan, to engage in the high-tech economy, to have innovation and such like that. Even more so in some cases than mainland China. Taiwan is an example of what China could be without the Communist Party, and that is a major, major threat to the Chinese Communist Party, such that they will do anything, including outright destroy Taiwan if they can, in order to get rid of that threat to their own power. And again, the big question is going to be, will the Biden administration stand by Taiwan? They're saying at least they're going to stand by diplomatically and continue supplying weapons to them, something Trump restarted. But again, we'll have to see if that means actual defense if it came down to it. Japan is also stepping up to the plate to some extent. Unclear how they would support Taiwan if it came down to it. But if Japan stepped in, that ties into the Quad Alliance, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. We'll have to see how it goes from here, folks. But again, I'll be keeping you updated on it. All right, folks, that said, it's getting a bit late, so we'll end it here. But again, I do these live Q&As every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And so that said, I'll see you again this coming Sunday at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And folks, we are totally demonetized by YouTube, but it still does help us if you could like and subscribe to this channel. It does help with the algorithm. It does help us. And so if you could, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. Let's get us out of this echo chamber, as you mentioned before. And folks, always wonderful talking with you all. Always great. And that said, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.